Well, our main function has been to promote economic and social development in the western counties. They're the counties Donegal down as far as Clare, west of the Shannon. Yes, and indeed, in the past we worked a lot on those issues about population decline and the investment of infrastructure in the region. And now, in many ways, the infrastructure has improved dramatically in the western region in relation to roads and rail, electricity in particular, and somewhat in telecommunications, even though there's much to be done, certainly on rural broadband. But the agenda has shifted a lot, really, in today's context. And our agenda now is our concern over the urbanisation of employment strategies. And I suppose this concept of smart cities for smart people or city regions. And kind of really a viewpoint or a mentality perhaps that has come through in our national policies that future growth is in cities. And therefore what is left for rural economies and rural areas. And the Western region is a largely rural area. 3/4 of our population live in rural areas outside of gateways and hubs and main towns. So our economy is not going to respond to large city and urban-based employment strategies. So we're concentrating on developing those strategies that are relevant for the Western region and ones where we can show growth, we can create employment and prevent what we're very concerned about at the moment is a return to the brain drain and the years of high unemployment and high long-term unemployment. Typically, a strategy that would be appropriate to the Western region are those in the green economy, renewable energy strategies. We'd have done a lot of work on wind farm investment and how small farmers and communities can be part of the wind farm industry. At the moment, we're involved in wood biomass, and we have a European project money to enable us to roll out a strategy that we have developed for the development of wood energy and biomass energy. So just, I suppose, by way of example, that project is to stimulate the market and the demand for biomass and to look at commercial models for maybe small allotments of forestry, maybe groupings of medium size and groupings of others, and look at how can these be commercially viable. We know that it's viable within a 30 kilometre radius. So typically there we're going to stimulate the supply side of it and the demand side of it, and we're going to proactively do that, and we have a strategy to do that. What we hope to create then are, and we've done the economic impact on it, up to 800 jobs throughout the region based on the forestry that we have. And this will be perhaps 5 hours a week extra work for a plumber on the installation of wood chip boilers, maybe extra work for local haulage companies, obviously for farmers and foresters, forestry consultants, electricians in terms of the installation as well. So we're looking at very locally based employment that is suitable to the employment profile of our region. So that'll be one strategy, but needs to be driven by the public sector. The state need to drive the demand and the market on that, because it's a new growth area and it's one where we can show strength in the Western region. Other examples will be the development of the medical device cluster, because there's one around Galway, Mayo and Sligo, and that we look at how we grow that sector. Another would be the creative industries. So these are typically industries that rely on human creativity. It can be art, it can be an architect, it can be someone developing software, gaming software, where it's their own imagination and creativity that develop the software. It can be the audiovisual sector, like we have in Spiddal in Galway. And we have put in place what we've called Creative West, which is a strategy to develop those creative industries. What do we mean by what kind of strategy? Well, it's to address issues like rural broadband, the fact that they're quite isolated throughout rural areas, they're not networked or connected, they're hard to find, there's no database of them in particular. The continuation of people into the creative industries relies on creativity being taught at school. So there's a challenge also as part of that strategy for the Department of Education and the education in secondary schools. Other elements of the strategy be workspace and planning and the environment in which they work with, and a challenge to see how can we get those industries to export and become export related in our rural economy. And the audiovisual cluster in Spiddal would be a great example where 2/3 of their work is export. They do media and TV programmes for France, for Germany, for the UK, and for LA, Los Angeles, all from a rural base in County Galway. So that's a good example of how we can have creativity in our rural areas that can export and drive our economic growth. Other sectors, for example, would be the marine sector. The marine is a huge asset in our region. There's renewable energy, there's the food, and there's the marine leisure. And the Volvo gave us a glimpse of what is possible and how big that market is. But that will not be developed on its own. That will only be developed by putting a strategic focus on it and driving it in terms of the training needed, the infrastructure that is needed, the link with tourism, the link with markets, the link with getting sailors at a competitive level that they can actually compete in big races and get Irish boats into that, so that we can see Irish boats and big races like the Volvo coming into Ireland. Why is it important to rural areas when most of our coast are in the most isolated rural areas? So it's an extremely important sector that we feel we need to put a strategic focus on it and actually be determined to grow it and grow the employment in that sector. I mean, obviously there's boat maintenance when they come in at port and the other facilities. Tourism is a very obvious one where we need a very coherent strategy to drive rural tourism. We know that the tourists have flocked over the years to the cities, and there has been this sense of urban break, city breaks. Well, you know, why is that? That's because most of the access is into urban areas. But we have an airport in the centre of Mayo, which you can have rural breaks. You still have your 3 days, but you can fly directly in and get the product that you want from Ireland, which typically we know are the friendliness of the Irish people, our music, our culture, our pubs and our landscape. It's all in rural areas, but we have to develop that product to make it accessible to the market and not let the sort of maybe fatalism about, oh well, they only want to go to cities and it's city breaks. You know, what effort have we done to try and create rural breaks? So that is about, you know, being proactive and going after that strategically and looking at the elements that are needed to deliver that. Our food industry is extremely important, our artisan food. And again, you know, they will take sort of determined strategies to develop them so that we are creating jobs and employment in our rural areas. So these would be the sectors. We're involved in some of them more than others. We would have been involved in tourism before the New Horizons report, and we would have been quite instrumental in seeing that tourism would become product oriented, you know, developing it rather than the membership structure that was there before. At the moment, we're involved in the creative sector and the wood energy sector, and they're the ones that we're working proactively at the moment. And we will be looking forward and working in collaboration to develop some of the other sectors in the new year.